Gyfu gumena bif gleng and helenis, rafu and wifshipper and lachna yawam, all on that wisp if they offer layas. Ayla, and welcome to this episode of Wyrdwayz. In today's episode I'm going to speak to you about the Anglo Saxon rune Gyfu. This is the rune of the gift. Now this is one of the runes where we only actually have the Anglo Saxon rune poem. There are no poems in Norwegian or Icelandic. So I'd like to begin just by reciting to you the poem in Old English. Gyfu gumena bif gleng and helenis, rafu and wifshipper and rachna yawam, all on that wisp if they offer layas. And we'll have that in modern English now, shall we? Gift is an honour and grace of men, a support and adornment, and for any exile, mercy and sustenance when he has no other. Now, early Anglo-Saxon society was based on the virtues that are expressed within this rune poem. You know, these were the fundamental concepts of the societal structure which supported and upheld the lives of the early Germanic settlers. So in this episode, we've got a lot to get through, to be honest. I'd like to talk to you about gift giving and receiving, which took place within the hall, why it happened, what it meant, how it supported the lives of the Anglo-Saxons. And in direct contrast to that, I'd like to speak to you about exile and feud, you know, kind of the direct opposite of what we're seeing happening in the hall, and how these concepts supported each other. And while we're at it, I'm going to talk a little bit about sacrifice as well. Why not? So we need to begin this story in the Mead Hall, so let's go. Hang on, this isn't the Mead Hall, this is some stinky old hovel. Let's try again, shall we? Ayla. So I made it to the Mead Hall, which is good because the weather is awful. Rainy weather. It's windy, it's blowy. We've had some terrible storms in the UK. Trees coming down all over the place. So I'm nice and snug in the Mead Hall. Got my nice drink with me. It's all good. But for life, for the early Germanic settlers in England, well, times were tough. If they weren't at threat from being ambushed, ransacked, subjugated by a rival clan, then they were at very real threat throughout certain times of the year from the fact that they were living in a subsistence economy. There would have been times with real scarcity. Now, when times are tough, the sensible thing to do is to band together, to form a close-knit, supportive community. And it's definitely true to say that there is strength in numbers. And I've spoken before in my video about Thorn, about how people would have looked to have a strong, powerful leader to protect them and keep them safe. But of course there is a price to pay for being a part of that community. You have to pull your weight, and everybody within a close-knit community would have a purpose and a role to play and responsibilities to uphold. So in today's episode, I want to talk about some of the social connections and networks that we find within the Hall. In the last episode on Cain, but at this point I just want to say that depending upon whereabouts in the country you lived, you may pronounce that as chain with a soft C, and in other parts you'd have pronounced it Cain with a harder C. Anyway, I digress. And in that episode I spoke about the Mead Hall, the Hall, the Drychten Hall, the hall of the powerful community leader, and how that hall served the community and the activities which happened within the hall. So today I want to talk more about the social relationships within the hall. Now, I have already covered one of the major ritual activities which happened within the Meadhall, and that is the symbol, and I covered that in my video, so I'll put a link below. But that is a ritualized drinking ceremony ritual where people would have made beoths, and they would have made boasts, and they would have made oaths. Now, today what I want to do is take a closer look at the social structures that existed in the hall and basically how these served the community. So let's first begin by taking a look at the major players within this social network. So before I do that, we're going to start with this. Yep, that's right, it's a loaf of bread, or a hlaf as it was called in Anglo Saxon times. Now, the names of our two main players are based upon this loaf of bread, believe it or not. But indeed, what better gift for a hungry person than a fresh loaf of bread? So we're going to meet the Lord and the Lady. So let's meet the Lord first. Here he is. Now, his name, he was known as the Hlavard, amongst other titles, which literally translates as bread guardian. And now let's meet the lady of the hall. Here she is. Now, her name was the Hlavdija. Now, that literally translates as bread maker. So I'm not talking about that thing that you bought on a whim that now sits in the back of your kitchen cupboard. You know, both of these names are based upon this staple food item, you know, your daily bread. So we see these two as providers of sustenance, of food, of shelter, of hospitality. Now, there is actually a name for a dependent, which is hlaveta, which means bread eater. And any of you with children, dependents, will know just how much bread and food in general they eat. Incredible amount, really. So anyway, so these two, and really to a greater extent the Hlavard as the dominant male, the alpha male, were at the very centre of a very complex and precariously balanced social network. Okay, so let's have a good look at this Hlavard, shall we? This lord. Now, he is a Drychten, a warlord, a powerful sword swinging, axe smashing kind of hard kind of dude. You know, he's not some fluffy old grey-haired granddad who's going to sit you on his knee and tell you how good you've been. Oh no, you know, he is He may look a bit wizened, but he has won his stripes. He has proven himself. He has shown himself to be the toughest guy on the block, basically. Now, as I have said before, previously, this was a very unstable time. There was a lots of tribal warfare. It wasn't all calm and settled. It was turbulent. It was a violent time. So it really was, a case of kill or be killed. People fighting for land and power. So the best thing you could do would be to affiliate yourself with a powerful lord. And if we look to Beowulf, as I like to do, lines 4 and 5, they describe the legendary Schilf chafing. And remember, I've told you this before, that was good crooning. That was a good king. So we'll just hear lines 4 to 5 from Beowulf. Oft schild chafing shiava fliatum, monogam maidum meod settler of tea. So what that actually means in modern English is oft shield the chafing from squadron foes, from many a tribe the mead bench tore. Now that doesn't mean that dear old Shield enjoyed a bit of, furniture removal for his mates at the weekend. Oh no, it means that he subjugated these clans. He literally ripped their mead halls to pieces. He laid waste to their safe hold. So whilst these warlords, these mead bench destroying Drilichtans, would wreak havoc to rival clans and tribes within their own mead hall, it was a very different story. So it was really important within the walls of the 4 walls of the mead hall. By the way, I've had a bit of a refurb on my mead hall. I hope you like it. Took me a while to paint. Sorry, where was I? Oh yes, so within these 4 walls, it was really important that peace, or thrift, as the Anglo Saxons called it, that was maintained and upheld within the mead hall. Outside, the exterior world could be turbulent and dangerous, savage, but inside it was important that peace and tranquility was maintained. And although this source that I'm going to read you now does come from a post-conversion source, it does show, it no doubt has early Germanic roots. So between 688 and 695, we have King Inna of Wessex. I'm in Wessex at the moment, shortly to be travelling to the Kingdom of East Anglia, but now I'm in Wessex. He wrote in the laws of Inna, which incidentally King Alfred later used almost verbatim in his laws. He wrote, "If anyone fights in the king's house, he shall forfeit all his inheritance, and it shall be in the king's judgment whether or not he shall lose his life. If anyone fights in a monastery, he shall pay 110 to 20 shillings compensation to the monastery." I think that's shillings. So yeah, if you had a scrap in a monastery, you're going to have to pay a fine. But if you got into a brawl in the king's hall, well, that was a big no-no, and you might even die because of it. So, this really does show the sanctity of keeping the peace within the hall. Okie dokie. Right, so where are we? So peace in these very turbulent early times of these migrant settlers was very often maintained through gifting. So the act of giving and receiving gifts really underpinned this early medieval society. Now, let's begin, shall we, by looking at the word Gyfu in the Bosworth Toller Dictionary, which is the best source for trying to translate Old English words into modern English. Now, Gyfu, spelt as it is in the rune poem, it's a feminine noun and it translates as a gift or grace. Okay, now we can also see an alternative spelling for this word, which is, oh, where are we? Here. And again, that's translated as gift, grace, and favour. You'll sometimes find alternative spellings in Old English, and I'd say there's probably an equal number of words spelt either way for this one. So if we actually look to the language, we can see loads of words in Old English which are related to the word Gyfu. There's heit Gyfu, a pleasing gift; cinch Gyfu, gift of treasure, a costly gift; sweod Gyfu, a gift of swords; wunder Gyfu, wondrous gift; Gyfa, a benefit giver, a giver of grace, a bestower of gifts; lian Gyfa, one who gives recompense. So I won't go on, but basically what I want to tell you is that there are loads of words in Anglo Saxon that are related to this word, which really does show how important it was to our early Germanic ancestors in this country. So gifting, the giving and receiving of gifts, was an activity where the hall, the wondrous hall, was the main arena for where this activity happened. And it's worth noting that the Anglo-Saxons, they had a very clear division in their mind between what was in the hall and what was outside of the hall. You know, the sanctity of the hall, the warmth, the comfort, the food, the drink, the company, the comradeship, all that was good was expressed as being within the hall. And then there was outside of the hall, you know, the hinterland, the wild places, the liminal places, the places where monsters and strange creatures lurked. And this is shown perfectly in the poem Beowulf, where the exterior world is the world haunted by Grendel and his kin. So, you know, Beowulf really does express that Germanic mindset perfectly. John M. Hill stated in his book, The Cultural World of Beowulf, that Beowulf is much less a story about monster slaying than it is a sophisticated social drama about what is best to do in this violent and changeable world. And indeed, the world was violent and was changeable. And within the Beowulf poem, there are many phrases and terms and words that are used to reinforce Hrothgar's position as being one who gives gifts, a gift giver. So the Danish king Hrothgar is very often referred to as a ring giver, a giver of rings. Now, quite often these rings would have been the kind of thing that I am wearing on my wrist. And I digress slightly, but there is a school of thought that thinks the reasons that we don't find many of these things is because they could have been used as currency, you know, little bits chopped off and used as payment. Sorry, where was I? I digressed. So I've actually got Seamus Heaney's translation. I think it's a 1990 something translation, I'm not sure, of Beowulf. I've got it on audio source, and I quite often like just to have it on in the background, you know, a bit of Beowulf while you're doing stuff. And there's a section here which I particularly liked that I will read to you. If this combat kills me, take care of my young company, my comrades in arms, and be sure also, my beloved Hrothgar, to send Hygelac the treasures I received. Let the Lord of the Geats gaze on that gold. Let Hrethel's son take note of it, and see that I found a ring giver of rare magnificence, and enjoyed the good of his generosity. I love that, a ring giver of rare magnificence. Now that's actually Beowulf lines 1473 to 1481. So let's hear it in Old English, shall we? Beowulf Mavaloda ben Egthauers Yethench nu Semerlen Maya Halfdanas Snotchler Fengel Nuich Sives Fus Gold winner Gumena Hwat wit Yeos Blachon Yifich at Fertha Thinula Shoulder Aldra Linan Fatzu me awera Wezu mundbola minum margothanum Hongaselum yif mech hild nima. So that's Beowulf lines 1473 to 1481. And that was what Beowulf said to Hrothgar when they had travelled to the mere just before Beowulf descended into the pool to fight with Grendel's mother. So let's go back to the Lord and the Lady, the Hlafod and the Hlafdia. And now, shall we, let's introduce another character to this scenario. Let's introduce a young warrior. Here he is. Now, as I've said, during this time, it was dangerous, it was changeable, it was violent, and there was very much a warrior society within the Anglo Saxon people. Now, Anglo Saxon warriors lived by a heroic code, which is very much evident in Old English poetry, particularly Beowulf, which is obviously an epic, heroic poem. Now, a young man in the society, he would be looking for a chance to prove himself, to establish himself, to prove his bravery, his worth, his courage, his wit, his strength. More importantly, he would be looking to ally himself with a strong leader. Now, it's true that within this society, a man without a leader was a man without social identity. You could say that they go together like a hand and a glove. It was extremely important for a man to have a lord, to have that connection between lord and retainer. Really, a man without a lord, you know, he was without ties, he was without connection, he was without a role which would define him in his community, in his society. So one of the keys to this heroic code is the reciprocal loyalty between lord and retainer. So let's have a look, shall we? Let's have a closer look at the relationship that's going on here between the Hlafod and the young warrior. So what we see here is a relationship based around gifting. So the lord will give to his retainer, okay? And that warrior, that retainer, is therefore bound to that lord through oaths of loyalty and fealty. Now, in some ways, it's actually better to think of these gifts more as loans than gifts. In fact, the modern word loan is actually derived from the Old English word lean, which means reward, gift, compensation, retribution. Okay, so I heard a song earlier. It was a Florence and the Machine song, and a line stuck out to me. This is a gift. It comes with a price. And there's very much a way of thinking amongst English people. I don't know how it is in other cultures, but we always have this thing like you don't get something for nothing. And people are very suspicious if something's free because they think, well, why, what's the catch? What's the catch? Why am I getting something for free? And that's actually a very old Germanic kind of thought process, because it stands to reason that this lord, this Hlavard, would not just be giving precious gifts, valuable gifts away to his retainer unless there was something in it for him. He needs something in exchange for these gifts. So the lord, who we could call a Larkgiver, one who gives gifts, he gives to his retainer, who we could call a Margulfthane, which means a retainer, a warrior servant. We could even call him a bench sit-end, which is literally bench sitter, but is actually a name for a warrior servant, a retainer, or a guest. Now, just interesting just to say that guests within the hall, although they were only guests, in that time that they were receiving the hospitality from the Lord, they would take on the temporary role of being a retainer and would be expected to fulfill the role of retainer with the responsibilities that came with that position. And you'll notice in the Beowulf poem that although Beowulf is a guest, he temporarily takes on the role of retainer. So the gift giving, what it does is it establishes an ongoing, continuing reciprocity. I can never say that word properly. So the Lord, he gives gold, he gives gifts, he gives weapons, fine food, a warm place by the fire, a roof over the head. And what he gets in exchange is unwavering loyalty and and a connection with that person, where that retainer would literally sacrifice their life and fight to the death for that lord. That is the connection between the lord and the retainer. And of course, the weapons that the Lord gives to his retainer, they are given with one purpose and one purpose only, to be used in combat for the Lord, and should the Lord be killed, to be used in revenge of that death. Now we can get a good insight into the Germanic mindset on this subject if we look back to the writings of Tacitus, who was writing about the Germanic tribes on the continent. He wrote it in AD 98. And he tells us, on the field of battle it is a disgrace to a chief to be surpassed in courage by his followers, and to the followers not to equal the courage of their chief. And to leave a battle alive after their chief has fallen means lifelong infamy and shame. To defend and protect him, and to let him get to the credit for their own acts of heroism, are the most solemn obligations of their allegiance. The chiefs fight for victory, the followers for their chief. So we can really think about this gifting that happens as a never-ending debt situation. One gives so that one may receive. In other words, rewards look for a return. And the Lord gives gifts in a sort of upfront payment for services that will be rendered in the future. I'll give you this, and then at some point in the future, if I need you to fight for me and to defend me, then you'll do that because I've already given you these gifts. And so the retainer takes those gifts and ends up fighting to repay this debt to his lord, but the lord then gives him more gifts. He honours the bravery and the skill of the warrior, but once again the warrior is kind of in this debt situation where he is obliged to fight for the lord again. So while this honours the retainers, with the gifting, it does place them into this debt that they must help the Lord in the future. Now, in this way, this heroic contract between the Lord and the retainer is reaffirmed, and it's kept continually alive. Now, you'll note in the Beowulf poem that while Beowulf manages to act as a retainer, he manages not to get himself stuck in this continual obligation cycle to Hrothgar, because really once you're in it, it can be kind of hard to get out of it. So this giving of costly gifts, not only would it enhance the reputation of the person receiving the gifts, for they would become wealthier and more honoured, but it would also enhance the reputation of the giver, the ring giver. A lord's reputation would increase. The better gifts he gave, the more men would seek him out to be in his service, and his warband would grow, and he would become more powerful and more successful. So within such a society, one's noble status, it really could be won or lost. Unlike the situation we're in nowadays, where we have to accept people that are born into power, they wouldn't have put up with that in Anglo Saxon times. The general consensus was that lord had to go, then that lord would be gone. Nobility and generosity tended to go pretty much hand in hand with each other. So if you were a miserly, mean, skin-flinted old lord who gave rubbish gifts and didn't give many of them, well, quite simply, you were not going to last very long. You'd be outed. And that would be the end of you. So we can hear in Beowulf lines 10:19 through to 10:28 about some of the wonderful gifts that Hrothgar, who we already know was a ring giver of rare magnificence, some of the wonderful gifts that he gave to Beowulf after he had slain Grendel. I'll read that to you first in modern English. To Beowulf gave the bairn of Halfdane a gold-wove banner, guerdon of triumph, broidered battle flag, breastplate and helmet, and a splendid sword was seen of many born to the brave one. Beowulf took cup in hall. For such costly gifts he suffered no shame in that soldier throng, for I heard a few heroes in heartier mood, with 4 such gifts so fashioned with gold, on the ale bench honouring others thus. Okay, now let's hear that in Old English. Oh, that storm's getting wild out there. For yeaf the Beowulfa ben Halfdanus, Seien Gildena Siurlus to Leena, Hrodden Hildukumber Helmen Benen, Marla Mathum Swerd Manije Jesauen, Beforlen Beon Berlen, Beowulf Jefa, Fullon Fletter, no hefale theoifta, for Shiotendum Shamigan Thorfda, Neje Fleon, each Fleond Lichor Feora Madmas, Golda Geirleda Gumana Fella, in ilo bencha offrum yeselam. So the thing that you will notice in everything I've said to you so far in this episode and all of these stories is that there is balance. There is balance and there is fairness. And, you know, I'll give you this and you give me that and everybody's happy. Now, if we look at the shape of this rune, then what we can see is the shape is symmetrical and it's balanced. Now, balance is very important. Balance is important in all aspects of life, and it's important in nature. For things to remain harmonious, then there must be balance. You know, there must be an equal exchange. The giving and the receiving needs to be equal within human relationships, and it needs to be equal within nature as well. And you know, some of the terrible problems that we're having at the moment are because there isn't that balance within nature that needs to exist in order for things to be harmonious. Without balance, then things cannot thrive. Now, if there isn't balance within a human relationship and one person ends up doing all the giving and somebody else ends up doing all the taking and not much giving, you know, this can very quickly build up to a level of resentment within the relationship. And, you know, and as we've seen within the natural world, this can quickly lead to disaster, and nothing good can ever come of that. Anyway, I have rambled on quite long enough. In the next the next part of this episode, I'm going to be looking at another aspect which is very important and prominent within Anglo Saxon life and features very heavily within the poetry of the Anglo Saxons, and that is feud and exile. And of course, exile is mentioned in this rune poem as well. So we're going to be looking at that next time. Unfortunately, I won't be in the Mead Hall, which is a shame, and hopefully the storm will have gone by then. So for now, I'd just like to thank all of my subscribers. I've been so busy rattling on about gifting that I've completely forgotten to do that so far, so I do apologise. It's really great to have you along. Thank you so much. If you like this video, please give it a like and a comment and subscribe to me if you haven't done already. I would be very grateful. I am on Instagram as Wyrdwayz and also Facebook as Wyrdwayz, the World of Anglo Saxon Runes, and also on Patreon as well. Anyway, so it's been great to have you along. I hope you have enjoyed this half episode about the Anglo Saxon rune Gyfu, and I will see you next time. Take care, don't get blown away. Okay, hale.